Witam serdecznie wszystkich w środę. Bardzo się cieszę, że jesteście na moim live'ie. Dzisiaj naszym gościem będzie neuronaukowiec Deanem Burnettem. Wywiad będzie po angielsku, ale słuchajcie uważnie, a na dole są napisy, bo będą na koniec pytania konkursowe. Okay, so welcome, Dean. I'm so happy for the publishing house for giving me this opportunity to have an interview with you, and thank you for agreeing to have an interview.
Of course, yes, no problem. I was happy to help.
Yes. Now, well, parents are really worried about teenagers nowadays. They think about their health, physical health, mental health, and so on. So I asked them to ask you a few questions that are worrying them, and a few from myself. So first of all, would you be so kind and tell us, does telephone influence really our physical health in a bad way?
It can do. I think there is perhaps an exaggerated expectation that phone use can be physically harmful in a lot of parents, but not that it's not true, but it's not as bad as people think. I mean, in the book, the first thing I talk about is the very classic complaint that parents have, that if you spend too long looking at your phone, you'll get square eyes, which, you know, it's this idea that when I was young, it was the TV that gave you square eyes, and I'm sure 200 years ago, it was like books or parchments would give you square eyes. It seems to be a preoccupation of many parents when it comes to children and the interface with technology. But this idea that just looking at something can have significant physical impacts is quite a persistent one, but it's not like evidence-based. There's no sort of way the phone can sort of like the images from a phone can definitely directly physically affect you. But it's more indirect than that. So my wife is an optometrist, like an eye doctor, and she's like one of the ones who's noted the sharp increase in myopia, short-sightedness amongst young people. And while it's sort of impossible to prove, it does seem to correlate very strongly with the introduction of phones and phone use and screens. And basically, not because of what's on the screen, but because of the distance. So like when you're young and you're growing, your eyes are part of your body which is sort of developing and acquiring the right shape, and that depends on what you use them for, like with muscles or anything. And usually when people like look around the world, they look at something far away, close up, in the middle distance, back and forth, up and down, and your eyes are always slightly adjusted to allow for that. But when you just spend like hours every day staying straight ahead of the screen, your eyes don't get the practice they need to become better at long range vision and stuff. So that's a physical effect. It's not like a definitely damaging one, but it's not good. It's definitely.
Yeah, I like your example when you mentioned that, well, it does harm our body, especially when somebody throws at you with the phone. That's one of the chances to be hit by the phone. Yes, of course, physical health is important, but probably what is more worrying for the parents is this mental health, especially nowadays when there are so many children suffering from different mental problems. More and more go to psychiatrists, psychologists for medical treatments. So what about the influence of the phones on the mental health?
Yeah, that is the one people are obviously most concerned with, how phones affect mental health, particularly in young people. It's widely believed that it's a direct and negative effect. Like it's in the mainstream, it is just taken for granted that, yes, use your phone too much, your mental health gets worse. But there's no actual scientific evidence to support this particular firm conclusion. There's lots of research being done into it, but so far nobody's found any sort of direct link in such a way. Even if you like look at the data in the most heavily scrutinized way in the sort of ways you want to look at it, any effect you find is really small. Like the classic example is it's about the same size. Phone use has the same impact on your mental health as eating potatoes does, which is obviously a different thing. Again, it's coincidental. It's incidental, but this doesn't mean that phones cannot harm mental health. It's just that it's not an automatic thing. And there's lots of like examples. Like in the UK, they were tracking the mental health of the population when the pandemic started, lockdown, and everyone's mental health got worse because of the situation in the first months, but teenagers and young people didn't, even though they're the most vulnerable group. And this was a time when they were just using smartphones like non-stop. That's all they could use, their phones and their tablets to communicate. So if if those devices had a reliable negative effect on mental health, you'd expect to see the mental health get much worse, but it didn't. It might have been protective or something like that. So yeah, phones can affect mental health, but it's very much down to the individual, what they're doing with it, how they're using it, like what are they doing with their phone, who are they talking to, what are they pursuing with it. So someone using it to study or chat with their friends or playing video games is actually quite healthy. That's a good thing. Someone like constantly scrolling Instagram or TikTok, looking at beautiful people and feeling bad as a result of it and getting body image issues, that's obviously a bad thing. But because there's no sort of reliable one way or the other, it's difficult to say the direct effect phones have on mental health of young people. It's what they do with it. It's the content rather than the actual device. And that's, I think, a distinction worth remembering.
Yeah. And I remember that you mentioned that generally teenagers have difficult life nowadays. There are so many economic problems, political problems, environmental problems, and they do worry. Although they are 15, 16, or 17, they still feel this threat that is constantly hanging in the air from the parents. We live in Poland, close to the border with other countries. And I know myself examples of teenagers who had to, after the war broke up, end up in the psychologist's a big cause of mental worries and problems with the fear and anxiety. So yes, phone is one of the things that can influence the mental health, but not the only one. That's very true. I always, but you said that it all depends what they focus on. The problem is that parents are very often at work during the whole day and they cannot control what the teenagers are doing on their phones. Generally, what do you think about this control? Should we control or we shouldn't? How?
It's a very tricky one because just step back and ignore phones for a second. Like when if you're a parent, you're at work, you can never really control what your child is doing when you're not there. And that is something which, over the generations, parents have become more and more preoccupied with. Like in the book, I show the data that for all so many modern parents complain that children are on their phones all the time and not going out and doing proper childhood things. That isn't used. Data suggests that's not because of the phones. That's actually been happening a lot long before phones were introduced. Like children are going out less and less as the years went by, and partly it's to do with urbanization. So there's fewer places to go now. There's more cars everywhere, development. But a big part of it is parental concern. Parents became more and more concerned with what happened, what could happen to their child outside, and kept them indoors more. So the control thing is, it manifests this way, and that pattern has gone into reverse recently with, the last few years, children are going out more and staying out longer, like parents want. And it's believed to be because they have phones now. So the concerned parents can get in touch with them and track them, and it sort of calms that anxiety. So if anything, like trying to stop phone use to get kids to go outside more is completely counterproductive. So this idea of control, it's a tricky one because it assumes that the parent knows best and that they're doing it for all the right reasons. And even if they do mean well, they can end up being, it can end up having the opposite effect. And it is a lot more healthy. A lot of the data says, like, when it comes to the parent-teen relationship, which is always a tricky one, always like a chaotic one and fractious one and so on and so on, the best strategy does seem to be a negotiating one. So it's like, when you're a parent with a small child, you have a very clear relationship. I'm a parent, I'm the provider, protector, but also I'm in charge. Child is, the sort of the passive one. They do as they're told, but they get looked after. And that works for like most when they're children. But when you're a teenager, suddenly you want independence and you want control of your own life. And your parents telling you can't do this, you can't do that, I know best, is, it bothers them on a fundamental level because that's not that stage of life that they need this control and stuff. So imposing rules and regulations on the child's phone based on what you think is best may seem good to you, but it can be perceived as a very bad idea because they might be quite, the teen will perceive that very badly, and it can end up being counterproductive because they think, well, they're just being controlling, they're just nagging, they just, they can lump it to the things my parents do which are annoying, therefore I should ignore them and avoid them. And so yeah, trying to control it is probably not the best strategy. My approach is, and again, sort of interactive one is, okay, so you want this? Okay, I'll let you have that if you do this. How about you do this? Like, okay, like let's meet in the middle here. So treating them as more like an equal in the relationship does tend to have the best results in the literature. So
yeah. Usually parents treat teenagers from this superior position, treating them like kids, and 15, 16, 17 is like a young adult without experience, and that's the only difference. Yes, I think that that's the big problem, because parents are losing control of in every domain, not only about phones, and that's the big problem. But there was this, in your opinion, as a scientist, what is the best age to give the phone for a kid?
Yeah, that's actually a question which comes up a lot, and it's another difficult one to pinpoint or pin down to one specific age, because the research suggests that it's all to do with maturity, like how mature and responsible is your child, and are they mature and responsible enough for a phone and all that involves. It's not just about using it sensibly; it's looking after it and remembering it. My son's left his phone behind multiple times. It's worrying because it's still an expensive device with all his information on it. So you need that level of responsibility too. And children mature at different rates. It's just a fact of life. Like, you will meet a 9-year-old who you think could be in university already, and you'll meet a 17-year-old who you wouldn't leave in charge of a hot chocolate, because they clearly are.
So I will ask a tricky question. What age your children could have the phone?
My son had his phone when he was 11, last year at primary school. My daughter is 9 and doesn't have one yet, but she gets to use the spare one to play with, like a couple of hours a day here and there. So she's perfectly happy with that. So
yeah, so I understand. 12, but, I gave the audience the question and the prizes, of course, your book. The question was, okay, you take away the phone, and what? What a more attractive alternative do you have for your kids? Because that's what I put attention on, that I understand that we all have to work and pay the bills, especially nowadays when there is this economic problems all over the world. But like, what alternative do you have? And some of my viewers said that, well, we go out and watch the sky, and we want to buy a telescope, or we started cooking together. So do you agree that there should be some more interesting alternative, or should we keep the teenagers interested in the family life more, or they are just going to live on their own without being interested and involved in the process of family?
Yeah, I do think the family bonding stuff is an underestimated useful tool in this situation, because like with my son, we felt it wasn't that he was doing it too much. He wasn't screen and phones, but he wasn't really doing anything else. Like, he doesn't like to read because he's too busy with YouTube and stuff, and he used to do a lot of football training at home, but now he's on Fortnite and stuff like that. So he still loves his football, but it's one of those things that, like, oh, you were so into it now, and now he's got this other thing. So trying to find alternatives which aren't screen-based. As always say to him you can do what you want in this time, just there you want, but just find something you like which isn't a screen. And it's trickier, or like isn't your phone or video games. But we found that helpful stuff is in when we do stuff with him. So like, I was going to the gym, I was like, do you want to come? He goes, yeah, I want to come. So he came to the gym with me, and we sort of did this workout he's seen on YouTube, ironically, because he wanted to be buff for YouTube, because that's a thing. Or like, if he's got his phone, like, okay, you want to go out and see a friend, fine, take your phone with you, and they'll just be outside for a few hours, just play football on the street. Or the phone itself actually helps with finding these other things to do. But yeah, now that we sort of got involved, it's still a screen thing, but rather than like spend 2 hours watching YouTube, he will join me and my wife for like, we find, like, it's like on Netflix, find a sitcom you like, we'll all watch it together. We'll recommend stuff for him. So we're watching The Good Place, which is a really good one. He's really into it now because it's very funny and really well done. But it's all about ethical debates and, again, moral quandaries and stuff. So yeah, but the fact we watch it together is a big deal for him. So yeah, I do think the family interaction side of things can be very useful and far more powerful than perhaps you realize. Because I think even if teens want independence, they don't want to be isolated. They don't want to be alone. So, spending pleasant time together is a really useful and powerful addition to this.
Yeah, I always add to the parents that there should be some rules, like no phone by the dinner table, yes, or breakfast table, or one screen at a time, because sometimes they have the laptops on their laps and watching TV and scrolling the TikTok. So it's completely too much, I think. But yes, I think that the time spent is really crucial. A lot of parents nowadays, because that was the question from the audience, have this parenting control on the phones. And one of mothers said that the child says that, well, it's limiting their rights to have a social life. And 2 hours is too little. Like, let's say a 15-year-old, what do you think from the scientific perspective? How much or how long should he or she spend on the phone? A 15-year-old?
15-year-old, it's again, it just still comes back to the question of what are they doing with it? Because if someone is just watching TikTok reels or YouTube shorts for like 6 hours, that's I can't see how that's healthy. It's doing anything so passively for so long isn't a good thing. Our brains don't respond well to that. Our bodies don't. So, yeah, I think if they're spending if it's just like mindless consumption, if it's a purely passive process, that is recognized as being quite bad. So let's say 3 hours a day, just looking at Instagram, just looking at TikTok, just looking at YouTube videos, that's probably too much. But if it's an active process, if they're interacting with the people in their feeds, with the people in their chat rooms, that actually seems to be much healthier. That does seem to have a protective effect on mental well-being. Like I mentioned, the whole pandemic thing. It's they had to use smartphones to communicate with people because they couldn't interact in person, and that sort of kept the mental health problems away for a bit because they weren't isolated, they weren't cut off from their communities.
Yeah. And the parents are also mentioning that they don't go away so often, but they do have social life, don't they?
Yes, totally. I was on a debate in the UK about this, and they said, one parent group who was quite strident about it, saying that children spend 3 hours a day on their screen. That's 3 hours of lost childhood every day. But that's not the case because modern day childhood, a lot of it happens online, happens by the phone. So if someone is on their phone, but if they're in a WhatsApp conversation or a Snapchat conversation with 20 friends, all discussing plans for the weekend or trying to make each other laugh or trying to sort of talk about something happening in school and talking through things, that's a healthy way to be. So I do remember back in my childhood, when I was 15, a lot of the time was I spent just sat in my room just looking at the wall for a bit because I had nothing else was going on. It was dark out, it was raining.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just gonna stare for a while, I suppose, and then we go to maybe a friend's house and stare at his wall for a while because
Exactly.
that's not necessarily the healthiest option, but that's just what we had, and now they don't have to do that, and it's not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, I had a couple who moved from Great Britain, Polish couple, to Poland, and they said, well, we want our son to go out. He wants to, but he has nobody to play with outside. So the only way is just online. And that's also interaction. I remember the scientific research that said that, well, it is the same quality, value, yes, relationship for teenagers, and it has no borders. Yes, they can correspond with teenagers from all over the world without any problem. But there was one more question I have from the viewer. Can you reset your brain full of images and content from the internet by, for example, hypnosis?
Probably not. I think there's this sort of idea, or might call it a myth, that the brain remembers literally everything that you experienced on some level. You just can't access it, and that's just that's not how the brain works. It doesn't have the information capacity for that. That would fill our brain with memory within minutes, probably, because there's just so much data being entered in our brain via the senses. I know there's you see these tricks, like someone gets hypnotized and retells a memory in exquisite detail from many, many years ago. But because of how memory works, it could be that they are literally just creating that as they go along. You get disorders where this happens, or things like confabulation, where people's memory doesn't work, so they look around the room and construct a story based on the cues around them. And they don't realize it's happening. They think this is a real memory. So, and it's one of those things like if you sort of, testing someone's memory from 20 years ago, how do you know it's right? How do you know? Were you there? Do you have like accurate records of the time? Which is something like social media is helping with, because now, if someone has a memory problem, if you've got a Facebook account, you can go back 10 years and say, oh, this is what happened then. And there is a record, there's a digital record of people online now. So that's actually helping memory research in a sort of unexpected way. But yeah, it's very unlikely that you'll remember just everything you've found on the internet and being triggered later on. It's the memory system is usually heavily emotion-based, emotion biased, because the things which have the most emotional impact, they tend to stay with you the longest, because when it comes to information entering your brain, emotion is like the sort of high priority tag to it. Okay, this is a neutral experience, this is a boring experience, which is why like researching and studying for an exam is always such a hard process, because it's usually abstract information with no emotional quality. It's just stuff you have to know. So like you can study for an exam for weeks and then pass the exam, and then a week later you don't remember any of it because your brain goes, I don't need that anymore. That's not a thing I care about anymore. But if you're a kid and you're in school and then your trousers fell down and everyone saw your pants, which were like pink novelty ones, that memory is going to stay with you forever, because that was humiliating and it's never going to go away. So
yeah, emotions play a crucial role. That's very true. Yes. So if we could say, so why do we argue? If the phone has both positive and negative effect on teenagers, why the phone is the problem, in your opinion?
There's lots of reasons for that. One is that adults and their children will perceive phones differently because of the different ages. And it's like we are at a very unique point in human history, because we've got digital immigrants, people who grew up without the internet and now have the internet. The world changed with the digital revolution. So like our childhood experience is not a digital one. There was no internet then, for most of the parents in the modern day. But we are raising digital natives, children who are born after the internet arrived and don't see anything. It's always been there. They've never had any question about it. And it's a weird situation. Like I told people, like I mentioned to my son, like he's 12. I said, when I was 12, there was no such thing as the internet or phones. And he looks at me as if I just said, when I was your age, there was no such thing as dogs. I'm like, what? No, of course they were. That's ridiculous. That's just how the world is. And so he doesn't quite grasp that. But that means, for most parents, like phones are a new thing. We have this idea of what childhood should be like, what should be happening in childhood. And it doesn't include phones, because our childhood didn't. Therefore, that's our framework. And we're seeing our kids have their own childhood with phones in it. And that's like a variable we don't recognize or don't understand and are therefore suspicious of, because things that don't fit your mental model of how the world works, we just are default wary of. Teens do not have that. As far as they're concerned, phones are part of the world and always have been. And I will say, in my own research, some of the most level-headed and sensible conversations I've had about phones have been with teenagers, because, like I say, they don't see them as the significant thing. They just think, it's just my phone. Why is everyone getting so worked up about it? Why is everyone so paranoid about this? It's just there. It's a thing we all have. So they are far more calm about them usually. It doesn't mean they're right. It's just that they are far more sort of like, chilled. So but they've got two completely different perspectives, which is already a ripe source for disagreement. But also throw that in the parent-teen dynamic of like, I want to be independent, you can't, I'm your parent, but I've got rules for you, but I don't like the rules, and the rules don't make any sense to me. Well, they should. That already is fractious. And throw this other variable in, the phone, which affects so much, like it affects the kid's social life, it affects your social life, it affects both your behaviors. Like, because so many parents say, put your phone down, you've had too much screen time, and then they're like wait, how do you get? I'm working. Are you? You can see how teenagers would find that bit double standard style. So yeah, so you can see how the phone works its way into all the classic trigger points of parenting conflict. And because also we don't know the long-term effects of phones, because we haven't had a long term yet. There's still relatively new technology. Like we don't know what happens later in life if you've been raised with a phone, because not enough time has passed. So there's always an uncertainty, which is another thing people in the human brain does not like uncertainty and not knowing stuff. So yeah, combine all these things together, you will have a very, very fertile ground for regular disagreements and arguments.
I think also that phones and general technology somehow prepares present generation for the future life, because digital literacy is a must. And well, okay, they can be reading Shakespeare in their room, but like, what's the reason? What's the point being? Yes, like they are going to work very often online. They are going to have businesses online. So it's like preparation for the future, isn't it?
Totally, yeah. And it's one of these ideas, it's been this idea that you should ban children from having a smartphone until they're like 16 or 18. Like that's the new law in Australia. It's being discussed in the UK.
Yeah, I heard that.
Yeah, I'm sure there's suggestions elsewhere. And it's all from the perspective of, protecting them and making them, sort of keeping them safer. But I don't necessarily think it would, because it's not like any sort of magical switch that goes off in your head when you're 16 and suddenly you're competent and responsible and mature in all ways, especially if you've never had a phone before. When you're 16, that could be when you're at your peak, emotional overload and desperate for validation or excitement and risk taking. You give someone the phone for the first time ever, like, oh wow, like I'm going to start looking up all the things I shouldn't, because I've got to make up for lost time. And they won't have the skills to navigate the online world. That's something you learn by experience. And having it all once at age 16 doesn't make you better at it. It could make you much worse. It could be a much worse impact. And yeah, it's one of those things. Like, a lot of parents seem to want to give their children their own childhood from the past. That doesn't take into account the fact that the world does change. Like I say, it's a digital world now.
Yeah, and it seems yes, and it seems that the best protection for our kids is just talking, having good relationship, doing things together, because then in that way you are going to know what is inside the head of your teenagers, what they are thinking about, what's your opinion, and the phone. I have read a lot of research as well, of course, about using phones. And you can, for the negative, you can find as many positive. And as a parent, we should be knowledgeable enough to make decision ourselves, yes, not to harm our children. I remember this boy whose mom took away the phone for a year. And when I observed him in the class as a teacher, I saw him, reading old comics, having this old-fashioned telephone, being isolated from teenagers. They were playing different games. He had no relationship with them because he didn't know what was going on in the world. It's like, teenagers go to school for breaks, not for lessons. So if you have nothing to talk about, what's the point of going at all?
Yeah, totally. And that's actually a recurring problem, which I think a lot of parents don't see coming. It's not like they see it like your childhood would be happening normally. Then now they got a phone, which is disrupting things. So if I just take the disruption away, they'll go back to having a normal childhood. They won't, because they say a lot of childhood interaction is now online. And even like small interventions, like I've talked to some people who the sleep issue is obviously that is an important one, because if you've got a phone in your hands, you can stay up really late. I've done it myself plenty of times. But sleep is extra important for a teenager because they don't get enough of it as it is at weird times, so they need more for their development. But they stay up late chatting with everyone, and that's bad, and that's not helpful. So a lot of parents saying, all right, 8 o'clock onwards, no more phone, can't have a phone anymore. And the results suggest that those kids do get more sleep, and they are a bit more sort of alert, a bit more healthy with their sleep hygiene. But then they are also more excluded, because when teens stay up late, they're actually interacting with their friends who stay up till like 10 o'clock chatting online. Fairly harmless, but then they go to school the next day and, oh, what are we talking about? Oh, that was after you'd gone. Like, so,
it's a nightmare, I think. It's like the modern form of bullying is exclusion, and it's the worst. Children really do suffer while being exposed to that. And I always tell my parents that, well, at 10, the life online just starts. And not finishes, yes, so it's a completely different thing. Okay, let me just look at the list of the questions. Well, a lot of parents punish their teenagers for the bad grades by taking the phone away. Is it effective?
I don't necessarily think it would be. I'm sure there are some cases where it helps, but I think by and large that's solving the wrong problem. It could be the case that their phone is the source of the distraction, which means they didn't study. And phones are like more entertaining, more compelling than reading schoolwork. That's undeniable because they have a lot more stuff to offer. But it it can seem like overkill. Like I say, especially for teenagers, a big part of their life, their identity, their social life, their interactions, their community is through the phone.
Yeah.
And by taking that away, you are making a significant change to their life, which can be, quite disruptive. Um, so, yeah, the whole punishment thing is a tricky one to figure out anyway. So, it's like you say, it's always best to have a discussion. It's okay, so why did you fail this exam? What's happening? What is bothering you? Like finding the root cause of it. Because a lot of the time it is parents making a judgment call on the information that they've got without involving the teenager in the process. So like, okay, you use your phone a lot, you failed an exam, must be because of the phone, I take phone away. And that will distance yourself from your team because they might have a completely different reason for why they think they failed or they don't like the studying. And then you just deprive them of a big chunk of their social life and all their friends' entertainment. And that will breed resentment. Because especially if you don't have any discussion with them about it, it's like, okay, I've decided this is the problem and I'm taking away your favorite thing and do as you're told because I'm in charge here.
Yeah. There is still a generation of parents who think me, myself, and I'm the boss, so I'm the one who makes the rules and can change the rules, and you are nobody. And teenagers, the generation of modern teenagers, have changed dramatically. They want the equal treatment. They want to be respected because respect gives respect. Yes.
Okay.
And is it easy or difficult to write a book?
It's difficult. It's not well, a book. It's I guess you could argue it's easy because I think one of the best ways to find out how many people you've known who've written a book is to get your own book published because then they will tell you. They will tell you very enthusiastically. So it seemed like every third person in my life had written a book once I published mine. But it's writing a book which people want to read is the tricky part. I just seem to have a knack for it, apparently, according to my readers. But especially when it comes to a book like this, which is technically for younger readers, but it's obviously that adults are going to read it too. And I'd hope so. That's sort of like the point. The titles are what they are to sort of goad adults into wanting to read it out of sheer affront sometimes. But I think my default stance is, which has served me really well, is assuming the reader, whoever that is, reads my stuff, is at least as smart as me. They just don't know what I know. So I always like to try and use that approach of,
Yeah.
okay, you're as clever as I am, you can get this, but I just happen to have encountered this, so here's why I'm telling you. I'm trying to put it in sort of terms that you don't need to have a degree to read. And that's, thus far, that seems to have worked for me personally.
And aren't you afraid that some parents may not like you because you are so straightforward in on some pages, like, well, it does not harm, like you said, and it doesn't make the square eye, so.
Well, that's already happened many times, so it's not like I'm really afraid. It's a fact. But I do think that's important. The first book was this is the sequel to the Why Your Parents Drank the Wall thing. One of the reasons I want to write this one in particular is because the discourse around phones and the harm they do, it is almost entirely led the creation of concerned parents talking to other concerned parents, then putting pressure on politicians.
Yeah.
And while I don't doubt the motives are noble and they're decent, obviously parents will protect their children, that's not how anything should work. Like such parents they don't like being told that, well, what your conclusions are not correct according to the science. Like your suspicions are valid, they make sense from how humans work, but all you're doing is just amplifying each other's paranoia, and that's not how anything should be sorted. You shouldn't be setting policy based on that. Because obviously, one of the things which I keep bringing up, which always sort of ends the argument usually, is that yes, you want to protect children, but all of you saying this, you're all concerned parents. You're all dedicated. Not every parent is. There are plenty of less good parents out there for whom their child's well-being is not the priority, And for a lot of those children who are more vulnerable and more at risk, who need to be protected more, their phone, their online life is the only refuge they have. And then
Yeah.
you want to bring in these rules which say like no phones for you and or your parents must check everything you do online. And that's like from people who are, will have good relationship with their kids, who want to protect their kids from possible risks. And as a result, they want to present vulnerable kids with definite risks. And it's like, that doesn't seem like the best policy for me. I think that's something which needs to be flagged up more.
Yes, thank you very much. It was really pleasure talking to you. Let me now just say a few words to the audience. Słuchajcie, kochani, to tyle, jeśli chodzi o wywiad z Deanem Burnettem. Do wygrania jest oczywiście książka Dlaczego rodzice tak czepiają się Twojego telefonu i co z tym zrobić? Ale są dwa pytania konkursowe. Pytanie pierwsze, jeśli uważnie słuchaliście, napiszcie w komentarzu, ile dzieci ma Dean Burnett. To pierwsza rzecz. A druga, jak nazywa się, nie pokażę Wam, tytułu, jak nazywa się pierwsza część książki z serii oczywiście dla rodziców. Napisz w komentarzu, kto pierwszy, ten lepszy, zgarnie oczywiście nagrodę. Dziękuję serdecznie i do usłyszenia w następnym odcinku.